The Gaza conflict is dividing politicians the world over. Western and Israeli leaders are ignoring growing calls in some European capitals for a ceasefire. Are they failing the very people who elected them to office? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, European leaders were unanimous in condemning Hamas's October the 7th attack on Israel. In the weeks since, deep fractures have appeared over the plight of civilians in Gaza. Could those fissures break some of Europe's left-leaning parties?
Keir Starmer, shame on you!
These protesters are supporters of the UK's left-leaning Labour Party, headed by Sir Keir Starmer. But his position on a ceasefire in Gaza is proving unpopular.
While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now.
My lords, pray be seated.
Instead, he's advocating for a pause in fighting. His stance is proving divisive within his party as well. Dozens of local councillors have resigned, and now a high-profile member of parliament has stepped down from his shadow cabinet position. In his resignation letter, Imran Hussain said his views differ substantially from the Labour leader, and went on to say a ceasefire is essential to ending the bloodshed, to ensuring that enough aid can pass into Gaza and reach those most in need, and to help ensure the safe return of the Israeli hostages. In Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's fragile coalition depends on the left-wing Sumar party. It has called for a ceasefire and the recognition of Palestine, which Sanchez so far does not support. Meanwhile, in France, far-left politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon has been clear on his pro-Palestinian views.
The most important, the most decisive, the most urgent, the most immediate thing is a ceasefire.
Before the war, public opinion was divided. This poll from July shows slightly more support for Israel than Palestine in Germany, and all the other European countries have a slightly higher percentage supporting Palestinians. Back in the UK, British Muslims who typically vote Labour are reconsidering. This survey, published on October 17th, with 30,000 respondents, suggests that of the 71% who voted for the party in 2019, fewer than 5% would do so if there's an election now. And with elections looming in the UK, the US, and European Parliament next year, will those divisions spill over into the ballot box?
Well, let's meet our guests from Rome. We are joined by the journalist Thomas Fazi. He's a columnist at the UnHerd news website. In Saint-Malo in northern France is Jacques Reland, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. And here with me in the studio is Scarlett MccGwire, who's a former UK Labour Party advisor. Scarlett, I'll come to you first. It really does look like left-wing politicians in Europe have been tying themselves up in knots, morally wrangling over what to do and say on all of this. Is that a good reading of it?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult because on the one hand, what happened in Israel was appalling, atrocious, and people felt, that Israel did have the right, absolutely had the right and duty to defend themselves. On the other hand, what we all knew was going to happen was that Israel was going to just bomb Gaza and kill thousands of Palestinians. So you have that moral problem to begin with. Then you have the key player in all of this is Joe Biden, the United States. I mean, obviously Blinken, but the United States. And actually, to call for anything that the United States isn't calling for is quite difficult and puts you on the outside. So that's, if you're Keir Starmer, if you're a top politician trying to look as though you are the next government. On the other hand, you have lots and lots of people in Britain on the left, and this includes a lot of Jews, actually, who are absolutely appalled by what's happening in Gaza. Feel it absolutely here and want a ceasefire. And it's a ceasefire or nothing. And actually, they'll take to the streets to ask for that, demand that, rather than, these are people who can't negotiate, right? They are just angry and furious. And so that's it's sort of the pragmatists against the idealists, and what needs to be negotiated, certainly in the UK, is a path for all of them to feel okay, which I don't think the Labour Party did very well at the beginning.
How heated does it get behind the scenes then? We see obviously politicians talking on radio, on TV, in the newspapers. How difficult does it get behind the scenes?
There's an awful lot of pressure on some MPs, particularly Muslim MPs from the mosques, who feel very, very strongly about it, about what to do. And there is also now a campaign saying no ceasefire, no vote, which is saying we're not going to vote for you unless you vote for a ceasefire. And I believe the Scottish National Party are considering bringing the debate to Parliament, so that actually Labour has to vote one way or the other, instead of trying, with some difficulty, but trying to keep everybody roughly together. I mean, Labour's always been a broad church on almost everything, right? I mean, there have always been debates.
Thomas, I'll come to you. What's it been like in Italy? How fractious an issue has this been for the left in your country?
Well, I guess a kind of similar scenario to what we're seeing in the UK. Nominally centre-left party, the Democratic Party, has fractured over the war. There was a peace march last week, which the party did not endorse. Some members participated individually, but the party itself did not endorse it. So I think what we're witnessing in Italy is the same thing that we're witnessing in a number of Western countries, and that is the complete untethering, I would say, between the political left, the establishment left, the parliamentarian left, and their constituents. You know, it shouldn't be complex. You know, parties should be accountable to their constituents, to their members, to their voters. And in this case, as has already been said, the stance of left-wing voters, but I would say beyond that, the stance of an overwhelming majority of people in a number of countries is, if not in support of the Palestinians, definitely in support of a ceasefire. So it shouldn't be complex, but and instead, what we're seeing is left-wing parties having a very hard time taking a clear stance on this issue. And I think that has to do, as I said, with the fact that these parties are less and less accountable to the people and more accountable to pressure groups, lobby groups, special interest groups, which include groups that have a lot to gain from wars. We've seen the stock prices of defense companies shoot up once again since the start of the war in Gaza. In the case of, in this specific case, we also have an extra factor, which is the power of the Israel lobby. We know that going up against the occupation and apartheid policies of the state of Israel is tantamount to political suicide. And no one knows that better than Jeremy Corbyn. And so I think this is a factor that has to be taken into account. I think it goes a long way in explaining why this is one of the few issues on which the left and the right in most major Western countries agree on, including in America, where you have this hyper-polarized context where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and especially Trump, disagree on about everything except the Israel question. So I think that's a factor that has to be taken into account, and that goes a long way in explaining this chasm between the establishment left and the people. Because for the people, this is it's pretty straightforward situation. The morals of the current conflict for a lot of people aren't that complicated. A lot of people see Israel as being the occupier, as it is, and the Palestinians as being the occupied. They see Israel as being the victimizer and the Palestinians as being the victims. And the October 7 attacks didn't fundamentally alter that reality in the perception, as horrifying as they were, they didn't alter that reality in the perception of a large number of people. And of course, what we've seen happening in Gaza over the past month has simply strengthened that perception in the eyes of a lot of people. Most people don't see this as a war, as, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war is when you have two more or less equivalent armies coming up against each other. They clearly see this as one of the most powerful high-tech armies in the world, essentially slaughtering defenseless civilians, which I think is quite an accurate description. So it's not complicated to understand why we have seen this overwhelming outpouring of support for Palestine against what Israel is doing in Gaza, and calling for a ceasefire. I think that's a perfectly, understandable stance. And frankly, it's that 10,000 people killed, 4,000 children killed in just a month. That's more than all the children killed in all the conflicts in the world since 2019. The fact that political parties still have a hard time calling for a ceasefire, I think, is simply shameful, and it's something that will come back to haunt them for a very long time.
Thanks, Thomas. Jacques, I want to ask you, in France, you have the largest Muslim community in Europe and you have the largest Jewish community in Europe. How difficult has this issue been then for Emmanuel Macron to navigate?
For Emmanuel Macron has had to do a big balancing act. He has to take into account the French tradition of pro-Palestinian, anti-colonial tradition. France has always had a position for the two-state solution, was a great supporter, not of Hamas, but of the OLP and West Bank and Mahmoud Abbas, but even though he has become impotent. So at the same time, he has to take into account also the fact that there has been a rise in anti-Semitism following following the Gaza bombings, and for him, he eventually found a kind of position which the problem, he was attacked by the left for not asking for a ceasefire, but asking for a ceasefire was a bit difficult. And then he went fairly late on a trip to Israel, but he also spoke to the Jordan King and to LCC in Egypt. And there his position became a bit better and more acceptable to the French opinion. That the balance, he said that it was necessary. Obviously, he describes Hamas as a terrorist force, not a resistance force. He sees that. And I would like to come back to that because that's a big ball of contention within the French left, because this war has really created havoc in the French left coalition. I can detail that a bit more, but to stay with Macron, insisting on humanitarian aid and still pushing for the idea of the two-state solution, which has always been the French position. France was not very involved with Palestine and Israel in the last 5-10 years, like most countries who thought that the Palestine question was kind of old hat. You could see that already. Egypt, you had the Abraham Accord with links between Israel and Arab countries. Saudi Arabia was ready to sign a deal with Israel. So the event of October have brought back the Palestinian issue at the top of the political agenda, the international political agenda today. And in spite of a mistake that he made when he asked for a coalition against terrorism, he has since corrected his position. And today, for example, had convoked a conference which was drafted on another conference on the future of peace to deal with the Palestinian question. And there he has actually said that it would be very important to go for a ceasefire. He knows that Israel won't bow to his thing, but it seems that there is a consensus. France, America, and Europe, which was very divided over the issue, unfortunately, and the Arab countries also, all trying to find some kind of future outcome, looking for a solution which seems almost impossible now, but there seems to be an awareness that Israel may not be allowed to do what it wants, and that we have to offer prospects to the Palestinian people following these terrible events and the bombings of Gaza. Everyone knows that Hamas is not, it won't destroy Hamas. Hamas is more than a party. It's a party.
Jacques, your president, Macron, has finally now called for a ceasefire. Let's have a listen to what he's said.
Les civils doivent être protégés.
Civilians must be protected, and this is absolutely essential and non-negotiable. It is an immediate necessity, and in the longer term it is also a prerequisite for the effectiveness of our fight against the terrorists. The situation today is serious and getting worse every day. In the immediate term, we need to work to protect civilians. To do this, we need a rapid humanitarian pause, and we need to work towards a ceasefire. This must become possible. We need to create the necessary space for humanitarian actors to operate in Gaza.
L'espace nécessaire aux acteurs humanitaires pour agir à Gaza.
Scarlett, Keir Starmer has basically backed the UK government in calling for humanitarian pauses, but he's not yet called for a ceasefire like Macron. Do you think he might soon?
Remember, Macron is a president, right? Whereas Keir Starmer is in opposition. And so what he doesn't need is to just do gesture politics, which is what he sees, is that it's about focusing on something that is achievable. Now, if it looks as though Biden, and that is the key person, if it looks as though Biden is moving towards it, then I think the Labour Party stand will move, because he will certainly back Biden going for ceasefire. I think Macron does make a difference, yeah.
Tell me, how much of Labour's stance right now is as a result of the Jeremy Corbyn years, when there were always stories in newspapers that Labour is anti-Semitic, Corbyn is allegedly anti-Semitic. Starmer's moved long and hard away from the Corbyn years, hasn't he? Do you think this is part of it?
Of course this is part of it. I mean, there is absolutely no question that the first thing Keir Starmer did when he got in was to make it absolutely clear that the party wouldn't have any anti-Semitism. He expelled quite a lot of people that he considered to be anti-Semite, and he's brought back people who disobeyed the rules, actually Jewish MPs who stood against Labour and will now come back into the party. So he's done an awful lot. And of course, that is part of it. I mean, the other part of it is that, remember, I mean, Tony Blair is very close to Israel and is very influential in the Labour Party. So that's what you've got, is this incredible split between the top of the Labour Party, whereas, as your two people said, you know, for the left has always supported Palestine, and for the left, it is what is happening in Gaza. I think so. In that way, you've got, and I do think that most of the left are very, very careful not to be anti-Semitic, right?
Thomas, can I ask you, in Italy, are you seeing a split between, say, what the political class are saying and thinking, and what the average person on the street feels?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have a government that is fully, unequivocally supportive of Israel in, just exactly the same manner as the US government is. And I think we seem to be kind of beating around the bush here in avoiding another crucial factor in explaining the response of a large number of most, if not all, European governments to the current conflict. And that's the fact that most of Europe has effectively been vassalized vis-a-vis the US. This has become, I think, very apparent over the part. It has been for a while, but I think it's become particularly apparent over the past 2 years since the explosion, since the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine, where we've seen the European Union as a whole and individual member states essentially parroting the American line on Ukraine, and we're seeing the same thing now happen on Israel, with few belated exceptions, such as Macron, but in general, I think this goes a long way in explaining this apparent unity among Western governments. It's not unity; it's simply the fact that a lot of European governments, a lot of European countries, are essentially vassal states. I think the UK is the most obvious example, but Italy is also a vassal state. We host countless amounts of US troops. We host some of the most important US bases in the Mediterranean, which are currently being used to support the operations, the Israeli military operations in Gaza. So, Italy is not free to take an independent, autonomous position on the issue, because it's not a fully sovereign country when it comes to foreign policy.
I want to bring in Jacques. Jacques, tell me, the French left-wing leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon, what has he said over the last couple of weeks, and how has the French public reacted?
From Jean-Luc Mélenchon, his declarations have really put the cat amongst the pigeons, have created havoc in the French left-wing coalition. The new PES is an alliance of La France Insoumise, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, the Socialist Party, the Greens, and the Communist Party. And Jean-Luc, LFI's position, mostly through the mouth of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but not only, has shocked the left on 2 occasions. First, by calling Hamas a terrorist, refusing to call Hamas a terrorist organization following the 7th of October, and calling it a resistance movement. And the latest one was only 3 days ago, when the president of the French National Assembly and the president of the French Senate called for a demonstration, a march on Sunday, to protest against the rising of anti-Semitism in France, due to there's been about a couple of thousand anti-Semitic incidents, some of them delegated from Russia, by the way. And most of the left-wing party wanted to take part, but Jean-Luc Mélenchon doesn't want to take part. And what he said that this manifestation is not a demonstration against anti-Semitism, it's a demonstration supporting Israel massacres. And that has gone down very badly. And his party will not attend the march. One of the reasons also would be that if Mélenchon was in that march, he would be subjected to great harassment. That's for sure. He wouldn't be able to survive. So in front, the left, and I think that the Israel bombings and so on, and the conflict is actually going to destroy the left-wing alliances. That's almost inevitable. There's already been many differences between Mélenchon's party and the rest of the left, mostly over the issue of Europe, and also over his stance towards Putin and Russia. But that could be the final nail in the coffin of the NUPES, the left-wing alliance.
Jacques, thank you. Scarlett, a lot of passion, obviously, in European politics over this issue. I want to talk about the use of language. A very senior British government cabinet minister recently described pro-Palestinian rallies in London as hate marches. Are you surprised by some of the rhetoric being used here?
I think it's really frightening. I think the way that what's happened is they're trying to weaponize and politicize something that actually shouldn't be. I mean, they are not hate marches, but because she said it, and because there are certainly people who go on the marches who are filled with hatred, but the vast majority...
They're peaceful.
Vast majority are the people who just want peace. And what's so terrible is to have the Home Secretary, I mean, one of the most senior people in the British government condemning a march, right, that is just calling for peace, and then saying, as she has said this week, that it shouldn't be allowed to go ahead on Saturday because it's Armistice Day, which recognises the end of the First World War. I mean, in fact, and people say, oh, it's disrespectful. Actually, the people who are organising on that Saturday, the Western Front men, say it should go ahead. That actually they don't want their march around what we call the Cenotaph in central London disrupted, but the march is going to go down to the American embassy, so it won't be. But also there's no question that this march was ever going to be thought of. So she's now picking on the police and saying that they like left-wing marches and don't like right-wing marches, and then, to cause even more trouble, have said in Ireland that it reminds her of the sectarian marches in Ireland. And again...
But only the Catholic ones.
Only the Catholic ones. Yes. Only the Catholic ones, not the other ones. I mean, this is a woman who is stirring up an awful lot of trouble.
Scarlett, thank you. And to Thomas and Jacques as well, thank you all for your input. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.